Hi everybody and welcome back to Exotics of the World TV. Now in this episode I'm going to cover one of my all-time favourite species of lizard. Alright, so in this video we're going to be talking about the basic care for eastern collared lizards. Please enjoy the rest of the content. So first things first, let's discuss where these guys are endemic to. So where do they come from? You can typically find the eastern collared lizard in the southern United States. So these guys will inhabit habitats such as kind of like deserted areas, rocky outcrops, scrublandy areas, dry forests, that type of thing. So they do inhabit quite a wide variety of different biomes. Now there's a running theme with this, they all are fairly dry. So now we've spoken about where these guys come from, let's move on to how we would care for them in captivity. The size of the enclosure that we would say to house collared lizards in is a 4 foot by 2 foot by 2 foot. Now this is larger than the standard consensus. So many people say because they're a small lizard, they are okay in something that's kind of like 3 foot by 18 by 18. However, these animals are very, very active, so we do need to offer them the space. They also do need very big thermal gradients inside the enclosure, of which you cannot realistically get inside of a 3B18B18. But as always, we'll put a pin in it and we'll get back to it later on in the video. So moving on to cleaning. So how often are we going to clean this enclosure? Now, if you are on top of your spot cleaning, so for example, every time that you see a bit of shedded skin or some feces, as long as you're on top of it, you'll be fine. You can go quite long periods without doing full cleans. Now, the reason for this is because they are an arid species. They're not going to go to the toilet that often. So, as said previously, as soon as you see a bit of feces, just spot clean it. The more on top of that you are, the longer you will have between full cleans. So with collared lizards inhabiting some of the most harshest environments known on planet Earth, we're going to try and recreate this in our enclosures. So touching back a little bit earlier onto why we do recommend a larger enclosure. And as always, if you want to go bigger, they definitely will utilize all of that space that you provide them. So moving on to heating then. So how hot does my collared lizard enclosure need to be? So we would typically recommend that the basking spot be anywhere from around about 40 to 45, sometimes even 48 degrees. Now, this is going to depend on your collared lizard. Some lizards like it a little bit warmer, some lizards like it a little bit cooler. So it's all about like monitoring it and turning up and down the thermostat to try and find that animal's sweet spot. So lizards, just like people, like it at different temperatures. Like I like it quite warm, other people prefer it a little bit cooler. So that temperature is for the basking spot. So your ambient temperature needs to fluctuate from the warm side being around about the high 20s. So we're talking 28, 29 to 30, 31, 32. And then the cool side being the low end of the 20s. So you're going to want it around about 23, 24 degrees, around about there, and you'll be absolutely fine. Now, collared lizards do like to have decent nighttime temperature drops. So you can cool these guys down to around about 18 degrees on a nighttime. If you're not too comfortable with that, then 20 degrees, 21, absolutely fine. But we would recommend to cool them down to a little bit cooler. As with all reptiles, the next item on our list of our basic care guide is in fact the UV beetle. Now, these guys are avid sun worshippers. You will typically find them out in the sun more than you do a bearded dragon. So these guys are going to require quite a high Ferguson zone. So the minimum Ferguson zone that we would recommend would be a Ferguson zone 3. Or if you have quite a tall enclosure, you can even go over to a Ferguson Zone 4 type lamp, just so you can have a look at the back of the bulb and you'll know how far that UVI is going to be penetrating down. So with these animals being a diurnal species, so being awake during the day, We would also highly recommend popping some LED lights in there. So this is going to brighten up the enclosure so it's super, super bright in there. So this is going to give them a nice day and night cycle as well. So the bulbs that we would typically recommend to use would be like a Jungle Dawn LED bar. It would be the Reptile Systems New Dawn, and you can also pop these Sandy lamps in there as well. So this is going to make your enclosure, in terms of light anyway, the closest to sunlight we can possibly get at the moment. And this is going to be really, really beneficial for your diurnal species of lizard. So something that's not typically spoken about when it comes to like desert dwelling animals is humidity. So how humid do I need to have it in my enclosure? So there are a couple of different kinds of coral lizard, but the main two ones that we typically see in the UK hobby are the western and the eastern. So at the minute we're going to be discussing the we are going to be discussing the eastern collared lizard, but there are differences in humidity between the two species. So the westerns like it a lot more dry, so they don't like as much humidity. So you're probably talking around about 30 to 40%, whereas the eastern collared lizards prefer a humidity range of around about 50 to 60. So how are you going to get like a decent kind of humid environment inside of your enclosure? Well, super pleased that you asked this question. So what you can do is you can offer these guys humid hides. Now, offering these guys humid hides is very, very important. So this is where they're going to get the majority of their moisture. So they will like lick the water from like the humid burrows and stuff like that. And it's also beneficial for them for shedding their skin. So if they don't have access to this, then the skin can dry on them and it can become layered, and it can then lead later down the line to further health problems. So at the minute in our enclosure, we have got the UVB bulb, we've got our basking spot bulb, and potentially we have got our LED bar in there. So do we need anything else to help control it, help regulate the temperatures and stuff in there? Yes. So we would always recommend any light emitting heat source that you always have them on a thermostat. Now, there are loads of different thermostats out there, but the ones you're going to need is a dimming thermostat. So this is going to be on your light emitting basking spot bulb. If you're not quite sure if your thermostat can get up to these temperatures, you can always ask your local exotic pet store, or you can pop in, have a chat with them, that type of thing. So on your thermostat, it'll be kind of like a small little box, and you will have 3 wires coming off it. One wire will be your probe. So this is the only piece of the equipment that is going to be inside of your enclosure. So you're going to want to pop it in there so you can get the readings of how hot it is. Once it is too hot in there, the bulb will dim down quite nicely. The second wire that you'll typically find on a thermostat is your mains plug. So this will go straight into your wall to actually power the system itself. The third wire is kind of like a little mini extension lead, and that is what your basking spot bulb is going to plug directly into. So it's going to control your basking spot bulb inside your enclosure. Now, a lot of people get thermostats and thermometers a little bit confused. Okay, so an easy way to remember is that the thermostat controls the temperature and the thermometer tells the temperature. Now, there are some quite high-tech thermostats out there that will also tell you what temperature it is in there. Some even do humidity as well. So modern day technology, absolutely phenomenal. But typically we see these two things are separate. So we've discussed the thermostat. That's the thing that's going to control the temperature inside your enclosure. Now, your thermometer. All right. So you can use lots of different kinds of thermometers, and we would always recommend using like at least 2. But if you want to go for a little bit more accuracy, you can always use 3. There are the dial thermometers, so these are okay. They're not super accurate, but they'll give you a good idea. If you want something a little bit more accurate, always go for a digital thermometer. These are going to be a hell of a lot more accurate and potentially give you a bit of peace of mind as well. So another piece of kit that is typically always often overlooked is your thermometer gun or your temperature gun. So these are really good for taking basking spot temperatures. So just bear in mind, these are only going to give you like surface level. They're not going to give you ambient temperature. They're only going to tell you how hot that basking spot is. But it's always cool to have one just in case. So we've got all these lights in there, so potentially we've got up to 3 lights, or maybe even 4 lights, depending on how full bore you're going to go into this. So we've got at least our UVB and our basking spot bulb. So a typically asked question is, do we leave it on throughout the night? Is the reptile going to get cold? No. We would recommend that you have a photo period of 12 hours. So 12 hours on, 12 hours off. This can be whatever like suits you and your lifestyle, basically. If you want it on at 6, you can have it on at 6. So 6 till 6, 7 till 7, 8 till 8, 9 till 9, whenever. As long as that animal is getting a 12-hour cycle. So this is also going to let the animal know when it's time to go to bed. We're now going to talk about substrates. So what substrates can I use inside my enclosure? So there are lots of different types of substrates that you can use. What I would typically use for my collared lizards is a mixture of kind of like the beardy life. We would also mix in some topsoil in there, just so you've got like a nice mixture. You want it a little bit more sandy than you do soily, but the topsoil is always good to try and bulk it out. Something else that you can use in there as well is the Zoom Med excavator clay. Now, I love using this for my arid species. So what I will do, I'll also mix it in there as well. So when I do spray in the mornings, over time, that is going to become quite hard and compacted. So you're going to have hard compacted areas, and you're also going to have kind of like sandy, soily areas as well, so the animal can dig. So the animal's going to have lots of bits and bobs to do inside the enclosure. Substrates that we wouldn't really recommend using would be things like Repti chip or bark chip or just cocoa fibre on its own. You're going to want like a more natural kind of mix in there. So something that's a little bit linked, kind of, is your decor. Now, your decor for your collared lizard is going to be very, very important. Now, these guys love a good dig. They like to hide in rocky outcrops and burrows and that type of thing. So it's going to be important to definitely have a really thick layer of substrate in there anyway, just so you can like create burrows, or the animal can create the burrows itself. Offering the animal lots of like branches, climbing spaces as well is really important, because they are also avid climbers. So they do it all. They climb, they dig, they're terrestrial, they do all sorts of bits and bobs. So it's all about offering that animal choice. So I would always recommend to go as natural as you possibly can. And in a 422, which is, like I said, the bare minimum that we recommend, you can do that adequately. So let's talk about what these guys are going to be eating. These little lizards are absolute gannets. They will smash near enough anything. So in the wild, they will typically predate upon like lots of different kinds of insects, that type of thing. But they will also eat other lizards. Now, this isn't going to be something that's available in the UK to do, or potentially elsewhere. But in the wild, it's what they would do. We do, however, need to make sure that our bugs are supplemented. So make sure that they are covered in the calcium and multivitamin powders before feeding. This is going to help stop your animal from getting lots of different kinds of diseases like vitamin A deficiencies, metabolic bone disease, all those other nasties that are quite easily avoidable in captivity. So how big are your collared lizards going to get? So typically males are a lot bigger. They tend to be a little bit more bulkier as well. So anywhere from around about 8 to 10 inches. That's from the end of the tail all the way to the snout. So what's quite interesting about collared lizards is that they are sexually dimorphic. So you can tell the difference between boys and girls. So when it comes to like the mating season, the male will flush himself with a turquoisey color for like the rest of his body. And the head typically goes a really nice bronzy kind of like yellow color. They are absolutely stunning. However, this only does last throughout the breeding season. After that, they go back to their normal coloration, which is kind of like a baseline of like grey, mottled browns, that type of thing. But they're still an absolutely stunning, beautiful species. Another cool and interesting fact is that when females are gravid, they will typically get these kind of like red spots all around like the collared area, which is where they get their namesake from. So just to signify that these females are gravid. So, do collared lizards brumate? Yes, they do. So, it's perfectly normal for them around about wintertime to start going off their food. They'll start hiding a little bit more. And this is what they do. So, in the wild, they will brumate to conserve as much energy as they possibly can as the temperature starts to cool down. So, the cooler temperature, the less likely that there's going to be food about. So, therefore, the animal needs to go into some sort of stasis just so it can survive. And that about wraps us up for this video. Thank you very much for sticking around right to the end. As I said before, collared lizards are one of my favourite species ever. Some people may call them a little bit basic, but I just like basic things, I suppose. But they're chock full of personality, and I would definitely recommend that you get some. So, on that bombshell, thank you very much, and we'll see you in the next one. Ta-ra, love.